This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
It's always interesting when I look over my notes for these shows I just watched. And I have no recollection of actually watching it. I was just glossing over my SmackDown notes right before I started recording, and same question over and over again. Was that a thing that actually happened? I mean, it's SmackDown. A lot of that show is easily forgettable the minute it's over. But even Retro Raw is kind of the same story. And trust me, there's plenty of memorable bad content on that show. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just getting old. Early onset dementia. Yeah, that's what it is. It's not the fact that the wrestling shows totally suck. No, it's on me. Yeah, well, I keep trying to convince myself that's the case. Welcome, everybody, to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. I'm sure a lot of people have heard me do the thing, if you're an avid watcher of the channel. But in the case that you are one of those stragglers, it's my favorite word of the month, straggler. A slow-moving individual that usually trails behind in the group. You may better know him in school as the fat kid with horrible cardio. So if you're one of those types of people, the ones that are checking out the FSWR channel 2 years in, well, where the hell have you been, for one? But since you're here, might as well do yourself a favor. Subscribe, comment, like the show, and while you're at it, maybe hit the treadmill if you're a straggler. The world needs more fit people, so be one of those guys or gals. Doesn't matter what the sex is. Be good looking. That's a good life lesson for the day, isn't it? Don't be ugly. Yeah, a lot of us are probably working on that daily. I'll get back to you. In the meantime, what are we here to talk about today? Aside from more bad wrestling? Well, it is the Monday podcast, so y'all know what that means. It's time to go over some WWF, WWE content that we have on tap. We will be running Retro Raw, Friday Night SmackDown, as well as Classic NXT. Can't leave that out of the conversation. We are currently reviewing the fall of 2013 for NXT, the very early incarnations of the black and gold brand. And so far it's been relatively fun going back and watching those old shows. I don't know how long the nostalgia is going to last before it wears off. But so far I'm enjoying myself. They're easy shows to watch, hour-long in runtime. A lot of familiar faces on there. Most of what goes on is comprehensible. This particular week had one garbage segment that I'm not looking forward to talking about, but beyond that, the October 2nd, 2013 date of NXT, I believe that's what it was. Let's see. Yep. October 2nd, 2013. It was a good show. For a developmental brand, there's always that little caveat. But we will get into that show at the end of the program today. For now, we're going to turn back in the time machine to a darker day in history. The year was 1994. No, I'm not about to go into that whole tirade. All right, Retro Raw. God, this Monday Night Raw. I'm just skimming over my notes now for this thing. This show is fucking putrid. And I should have known how bad it was going to be when the advertised main event for this week was the British Bulldog versus Jim Neidhart. I tried to be optimistic. Tried to give it the benefit of the doubt. In the back of my head, when they announced it last week, I was like, surely it can't be that bad. You know, I know Bulldog and Anvil weren't really renowned for being technical wizards, but, you know, they could probably piece together a moderately okay big guy match. How hard could it be? Well, I spoke too soon. Should have known better. This match was absolutely horrible. Of course, Vince had the balls on commentary to ask, what kind of match will this be? Perhaps one of scientific finesse. I need to know what planet he was living on. At what stage of his career did Jim the Anvil Neidhart ever use scientific finesse to work his matches? The only thing scientific about the Anvil was his lack of cardio. I mean, Neidhart was blown up 3 minutes into this 15-minute match, plus commercials. And that was made worse by the fact that about 10 of those 15 minutes was him getting the heat on Davey Boy. I'll talk about some of the lowlights here shortly, but I think my favorite part of the match by far, their commercial pitch spot, was Owen pulling down the ropes so Bulldog could take a bump out to the floor and sell his leg. And that was where Brett came down to the ring to be the equalizer. But they come back from break. Vince is saying, Bulldog's really favoring the knee after he landed hard on the floor. So, of course, what is the Anvil doing when they come back from break? He's working over Bulldog in a chin lock. Yeah. Really working that injury angle, aren't we? At which point, about a minute later, in order to continue to work the leg injury, Neidhart then slaps on a bear hug. He thought to himself, I know, if I apply a standing bear hug, that'll weaken the Bulldog's knees, and there will be no way he'll be able to stand up properly. Genius. A genius move on the Anvil's part. It was something. Of course, the only real highlight here is Owen being the petulant child on the floor, saying, everything was fine out here until that no-good Brett stuck his nose in everything. He's the perfect heel. Literally, as Brett is standing across the ring, playing cheerleader for Davey Boy, but Owen has to say, he's screwing everything up. I'm like, he is standing there doing nothing. What a prick. This is also where I wrote down, Neidhart has now officially gotten the heat on Bulldog for seemingly an hour, and nothing of note has happened in this match. A lot of his stuff looks slow and choppy. He dropped the strap at one point to reveal his giant bloated gut. Also not a pleasant sighting. And finally, at the point he goes up and misses a diving knee drop, Davey makes his comeback on the Anvil by hitting, not making this up, a vertical suplex. one suplex. And it's immediately jump cut to the aisleway to show Bob Backlund confronting Brett. And about 5 seconds after that, Owen just hits the ring for the blatant DQ. I was like, seriously now? 15 minutes of the worst match in Raw history just to get to a DQ fucking finish? Why bother? This was Bulldog's first match back in the WWF since the summer of '92. In his first match back, it's a DQ win over the Anvil. You couldn't even at least let him get the pin. I was so pissed. I mean, the Backlund stuff was all story material that had nothing to do with this match. Didn't even really factor into the finish if you think about it. And then there was all the sloppy post-match stuff where guys were just bumbling around for a minute until the heels powdered. But even going back to the Bret Owen thing for a minute, I talked about how that feud was something that kind of got brushed under the rug after SummerSlam 94. Now we're kind of seeing that unfold in front of our eyes. Yeah, they're technically still feuding, but I mean, you can already see they're getting ready to transition Bret into stuff with Backlund. After the fact, Diesel. It's just one of those things where it was so disappointing when you look back and think, man, we never got a real proper send-off to that feud. It just sort of fell off the map in early 95 and was never revisited. Owen immediately fell into the backdrop. Bret, he went on to do his own thing, and that was pretty much it. Terrible start to the show. At which point, we got a spoof/parody of the MLB strike, with WWF poking fun about how they never have off seasons in wrestling, which was mildly humorous. I thought the whole thing was going to be a giant rib on Abe Knuckleball Schwartz. But no. It was just Savage laughing about how there's not going to be a World Series this year. And they had some 8-year-old kid on the pitcher's mound crying. This was actually pretty great. And I really had no knowledge about the Major League Baseball strike in 1994. I wasn't a baseball fan for one, so I didn't really care. But Vince sure wasn't backing down from poking fun at it. He was having loads of fun. And eventually we get to our second match in the program, figuring we needed a bit of a picker-upper following that opening match. The second match on the card is Doink versus Barry Horowitz. I wrote down, is the goal to intentionally drive off as many viewers as possible? Well, regardless, these two also had a relatively bad match. And this one only went about 2 minutes as opposed to 15. So I guess you could say they spared us the torture. They were about a minute in when they went to do the drop-down leapfrog spot, and Doink barely cleared the leapfrog as Barry was doing the duck under. Doink almost got inadvertently crotched. From there, it was Barry getting about 30 seconds of heat until Doink fired back and won with the whoopee cushion. And yes, they even canned in the farting sound effect. Did you really think they wouldn't? I have nothing further to add. Doink is still feuding with Lawler. It's astonishing to think that the King actually put up with that hot garbage. I'd have told these clowns to stick it. Put me in a feud with Doink the Clown in 1994. See how much patience I would have had at the time. Speaking of the King, well, actually before that, We had a quick pre-tape with Paul Bearer and The Undertaker inside the boiler room again. This time the cameraman was laying inside the coffin to shoot this. Must have been rather uncomfortable. All that equipment laying on top of you. And while Bear and Taker are doing their long, dramatic, sinister promos on Yokozuna, talking about the wrath of darkness and the deprivation of souls, we get the very slow, theatrical lowering of the casket lid. Again, with Paul Bear wagging his finger at the coffin and making the signature Paul Bear stank face. That was all fine and dandy. If you are willing to suspend disbelief for more than 2 seconds. And then we pitch back to the ring for the King's Court segment with special guests Yokozuna and Jim Cornette. And I think Mr. Fuji was there, although I didn't really take note of it. And as per usual, Lawler's out there beforehand trying to get some heat on himself and act like a fool. So right before he introduces Yoko and Corny, he says something to the effect of, "You know what I can't stand about people like Doink and Dink? The fact that they have to dress up in clown outfits to try to get attention. I can't stand people that dress up to try to get attention." Now, of course, if you can put 2 and 2 together, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. That's the joke. So, of course, the Macho Man immediately has to kill it by going, "You mean like a man with a crown and a cape?" Fucking seriously, dude? You just had to run the joke into the ground? It's like I'm watching Nitro. So anyway, eventually Lawler brings out the heels. Vince and Macho are running down about 900 celebrity names, most of which went over my head. I believe I heard them reference a fat joke directed toward Roseanne Barr. I don't know how well that went over with the network. I mean, they didn't get canned, so I'm assuming they were okay with it. But the entire premise of the promo was Lawler trying to convince the people that Yokozuna is not afraid of The Undertaker or caskets. But of course, the gag is that Yoko doesn't like hearing the word casket. So JC's trying to use all these modified terms to get around having to refer to it as a casket on live TV. He calls it a giant box with a lid that you have to stuff your opponent inside. It's like how we do things today where we have to be politically correct with everything. So we take very simple words like deaf and blind, and we have to reshape them by saying hearing or vision impaired. You know, just to make sure we don't trigger anybody. Because that's how modern society works in 2023. You do not want to offend. So, of course, Lawler's ribbing Yoko here by saying the word casket over and over again, and then he tries to point at Corny to blame him. That was at least funny. But other than that, Cornette reminded us that the last time we saw Yoko versus Taker in a casket match, Yoko won. He also forgot to add him and the entire fucking heel roster. But, again, that was pretty much all there was to the segment. Cornette vowed the same thing would happen again. Meanwhile, I'm watching Yoko wipe the sweat off his face and then rub it on the lens of the camera in the ring. He was grotesquely moist in this segment. Lot of perspiration being dropped here. I really wonder how humid it actually was in the building. They were in Utica again, correct? I mean, hard to imagine it being that hot here in New York in the fall. But I mean, I never know how hot these buildings actually were back in the day. I mean, I know they cranked the heat up a lot in these buildings, but I also know that Yoko was packing on a lot of weight, so that probably didn't help matters any. But everybody in this segment was very wet. That was my takeaway from it. And then the bad wrestling trend continued this week as we go back to the ring for a tag match with the ladies. I believe consisting of the entire women's division in the WWF at this point. 4 girls. It is Alundra Blaze and Heidi Lee Morgan versus Bull Nakano and Luna Vachon. 2 baby faces, 2 heels. The only 4 girls we've seen featured on WWF television in the last 8 months. And out of the 4 girls involved here, the obvious best worker in the ring was Bull Nakano. So naturally, she probably spent the least amount of time in the ring here. The first few minutes were really rough to sit through. I don't know what was going on with Luna here. She was horrible in this match. She looked totally lost. Everything she did looked like it was in slow motion. Like she's in there working over Heidi for the heat at one point. Nothing she does looks good. And trust me, Heidi was far from a great babyface in peril. When she did the shoulder block spot with Bull, and they both did the standoff, I called bullshit. I was like, are you kidding me? You're going to try to convince me that Bull wasn't going to be able to knock down Heidi Lee Morgan with a shoulder block? She had no way of winning that test of strength. The biggest girl and the smallest girl in the ring at the same time? Bullshit. So finally, Alundra got the hot tag. She made a somewhat sloppy comeback on the heels. Totally broke down at the finish where all 4 girls were just kind of doing catfight spots. And finally, Bull tags in Luna at the end. Bull gets taken out with a missile dropkick from Heidi. And then Alundra gave Luna a bridging suplex, dumping her directly on the back of her head and neck. I thought, well, if Luna wasn't concussed on the spot, I'll be shocked. She killed her with this move. Yeah, this was no good. I don't even know what the point of it was, if I'm being honest. To remind us that there was still a women's division in the WWF at this point? Currently consisting of these 4 girls? Sure, I guess. And crowd didn't seem to care one way or the other. I didn't care because we rarely see the girls featured on TV anyway. I mean, we've already seen Alundra Blaze and Bull Nakano several times in singles action. That was probably the best pairing you could get out of the 4 girls involved. Again, it's just nothing much to add. It was time filler, basically. And then for the final match on the program, it is Mr. Bob Backlund versus Gary Scott, where Backlund went over in about 2 minutes with a chicken wing. I mean, it was fun watching him trade amateur takedowns with Scott, and Scott being totally out to lunch with what he was supposed to do. Beyond that, though, just a quick little squash. It did, however, tie in with the final segment on the show, as they cut to a pre-tape with Bret Hart right before they close, and he got to recap the confrontation from earlier with Backlund. And, well, this is odd. Bret's talking about how Backlund has lost his marbles, saying Backlund was out there demanding a title shot against Bret, but Bret already beat him fair and square. He said he's already got 100 different challengers lined up, so if Backlund wants a title shot, he's going to have to go to the back of the line and wait his turn. And I'm sitting there like, huh. Well, that was a rather heelish thing to say. And he literally said in this exact promo, my job is to take on all comers. I was like, so I guess Bob Backlund is invisible then? It was a weird promo. He just totally blew the confrontation off, which, well, I guess doesn't bode well for Bret then, does it? Because he essentially dug his own grave here, if that's the case. After seeing all the heinous shit that Backlund's been doing on TV recently, I don't think that response is going to sit well with him. Bret refusing to give Backlund a title match. We'll see how that goes. Maybe Bret has a receipt coming. God, I wish I got a receipt for having watched the show. That way I could take it to customer service and demand my money back. This show was terrible. An absolute waste of time. Like, the only thing remotely worth watching here was Vince taking jabs at the MLB and poking fun at the baseball strike. You know, as well as some of the banter with Lawler and Cornette in the King's Court segment. Content-wise, match-wise, yeah, everything else pretty much sucked. There were like no redeeming qualities to this one. I should have known. Your advertised main event was Bulldog versus Neidhart. Nothing good was going to come out of that. And again, I like Davey Boy, nothing against him. But, you know, he hadn't wrestled in the WWF in well over 2 years. The Anvil is the Anvil. His solo matches were never any good. 15 minutes of TV time they devoted to that. What were they thinking? I mean, I guess the only good to come out of it was that they finally got their fucking world champion on the show for the first time in 17 weeks. That was a plus, I guess. But beyond that, not much else going on this week, unfortunately. And as we turn things over and transition to SmackDown from Friday night, the plot thickens. Turns out they took another detour in this ongoing John Cena bloodline saga. It was not as simple as removing AJ from the equation and throwing in The Rock. No, that would have made too much sense. No, instead, we got another curveball thrown at us. Guess I should have figured it would have been too easy to go with Rock and Cena as the babyface team. I guess they're trying to save that Rock return for a bigger occasion, as opposed to a throwaway pay-per-view that nobody cares about. Quite frankly, I don't blame them. But in any case, as is the story with a lot of these SmackDowns, there's primarily one thing on the show that's consistently worth coming back to check out every week, and that is the Bloodline. And everything else is there to pretty much fill the remaining hour and 45 minutes of programming. Take out commercials, I guess. So we kick it off with Paul E., Jimmy Uso, and Solo coming down to basically kill about 5 minutes of airtime. Heyman was there to acknowledge the tribal chief Roman Reigns, who again was not on the show this week. And after they showed some video footage to run down all the recent drama in the Bloodline soap opera, Paulie tried to continue his promo by joking that Cena's cooped up in a hospital bed right now, so he will not be at the arena tonight. Laughable. Little how Paul Heyman forgets how Super Cena works. That man doesn't sell a fucking thing. Yeah, we all knew he was going to be back. Better than ever. And boy, he proved us right. But finally, while Paulie's doing his thing, Jimmy Uso snags the mic so he could try to do a heel promo on Cena. And it's kind of one of the running gags they've got going on right now with Jimmy Uso. Like him constantly stepping out of line and trying to hijack the segments by interrupting Paul Heyman's promos. It's probably one of those things that Roman will address next time he shows up on TV and Jimmy tries to go into business for himself at the expense of the bloodline again. I don't know. Some tells me that ain't going to fly with Roman, brother. Jimmy better watch himself. So anyway, long story short, the payoff to this was Carl Anderson running out from the crowd to jump attack the heels and then challenge them to an impromptu match. Continuing with our weekly theme of Friday Night SmackDown, the show where they never bother to book a full card in advance before they go on the air, hence why we get 2 or 3 impromptu matches every week. Of course, I joked here with Anderson when he ran it from behind. I didn't even recognize him at first, because all I saw was generic bald guy with a beard and a t-shirt hit the ring. I just assumed it was a mark. Nope. Turns out it was one of the bald egg jobbers. Yeah, he's still employed. And that directly led into Carl Anderson versus Jimmy Uso after the break, which went about 2 minutes, and then Jimmy won with a big splash. I didn't even have time to leave the room to take a piss. That's how short it was. I mean, I figured they were going to go at least 10. Nope. Turns out they don't even think enough of Carl Anderson at this point to let him go 5. What a geek. And you're telling me that guy didn't make the list of 20-something roster cuts in the last 7 days? They fired Mustafa Ali, but they kept this fucking guy around? Where's Dog Gallows at? Was he part of the recent chopping block? That would actually be pretty funny. If they fired Doc, but they decided to keep Carl around. They said, yeah, we don't like the big, tall, bald egg jobber guy, but we'll keep the shorter one. He might be useful. Whatever. So, well, we did get a brief Santos interview ahead of the U.S. title match for later on with Ray. I mean, I just basically wrote down generic, bland-ass, white meat babyface promo that sounded so forced and scripted. He's talking about how the match is about pride and heart and respect. Sitting there like, get the fuck out of here with that shit. It's like, I don't know. Could they be making it any more apparent this guy is turning heel? This is so beyond telegraphed. Like, they may as well just put a giant sign that reads, liar, with a big arrow pointing down toward him. I mean, we're all just waiting for it at this point. It's so obvious. I'll talk about that match in a bit. What I won't talk about is this Grayson Fodder segment with Bobby Lashley and the Street Profits. I've said pretty much everything there is to say about Grayson at this point. I'm totally fed up with these stupid talk show segments. The fake palm trees, all the pomp and circumstance they're putting behind this guy. He's not over. No one gives a shit about him. He's a nameless, talentless hack that they're trying to pretend is a big deal when he's clearly not. And I don't care what Sean or Hunter say otherwise. They might see something in the guy. I don't. And them forcing this fucker down my throat week after week ain't getting him any more over with me. It's actually going the other way. And so he was out there to kill some time by interviewing Bobby Lashley. And if you've ever heard Lashley do a promo before, you pretty much know what you're getting there. He is far from what you would call captivating on the stick. He's no Jake the Snake Roberts, that's for damn sure. So I pretty much skipped to the end to see if there was anything interesting that would happen. Turns out my suspicions were correct. It was a totally skippable segment. Because after Austin Theory joined in at the very end, he does the stare down with Lashley and the Profits right as they were passing in the aisleway. And they come back from break. And we get Austin Theory versus Cameron Grimes. Cameron Grimes. I don't even remember the last time I saw Cameron Grimes on this fucking show. It's been weeks. The best thing they did with him since he got called up was having him squash Baron Corbin in like 8 seconds with a double foot stomp. I'm pretty sure that was his main roster debut. Since that point, they've done jack shit with him creatively. He's just a guy. Now they're sending him out there to do jobs to Austin Theory. That sucks, because Cameron Grimes is a really talented worker. If they'd have capitalized on that first victory they gave him over Corbin months back, they could have had something. Because this guy was incredibly great in NXT years ago. The whole $1 Million Man stuff with him and Ted. All the wacky to the moon promos he was doing. He had a look. He had personality. Like, this is someone they ought to have strongly considered pushing. Instead of Grayson fucking Waller. And Grayson ain't drawing 2 cents in Chinese money. Cameron Grimes is the one that could be a fucking star for you if you actually tried. Nah. No, instead they have Grayson distract Grimes on the floor so Theory could run him into the ring post and then hit him with his A-Town down for the pin. Flatter than a plate full of piss. So that sucked. And I like Theory. Nothing against the guy. But it's just a total waste of Cameron Grimes to book him in a spot like this. Just wasted potential. They got plenty of guys on that roster they could feed to Austin Theory. Why Grimes? Did he piss off the office? Have they just given up on him? So stupid. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the Santos Escobar-Rey Mysterio U.S. title match. Ironically enough, and I know this wasn't that long ago, the last time these guys faced off together, didn't they have to abruptly call off the match because Rey got hurt? So it basically ended with Escobar going over via forfeit. If I'm not mistaken, I think that was the match that determined who would wrestle Theory for the belt at SummerSlam when he was still the champion. See, I remember things. It's not often I retain information like that, but sometimes things click. And I can confirm this 100%. Take this to the bank. No question. This was 1,000 times better than the first match these guys had on TV. Light years better. And I'll admit, it took a while to get going for me. It started off relatively slow and kind of plodding. For about 80% of the match, it was Rey selling while Escobar was working him over. It's not to say that any of Escobar's stuff looked bad, because that's not the case at all. It's just the problem of, because the match was essentially a babyface match, you didn't really have a clear-cut guy to cheer or boo. So when Escobar was in control, a lot of the fans were mostly quiet. So they kind of lost me for a while with what they were doing. There was also the completely random shot where, as Escobar is working over Rey in the ring, they cut to a split screen to show Jimmy and Solo laying out geeks in the back. I was like, what is the point of this? Are the Bloodline about to do a run-in to throw the match out? Because I was waiting for it. Turns out they didn't factor into the match at all. So I don't know what the hell was going on there. And again, they're trying to work the story where Rey's favoring the back. He's intentionally limping and being really slow to respond to things. Escobar's staying on him, and he kept working over the injury angle. Again, it's not bad. It's just the issue of, are the fans supposed to boo Escobar even though he's still technically a babyface? He did end up doing that tope dive out to the floor again onto Rey. The same one that knocked Rey loopy the first time when he clocked the back of his head on the ground. Luckily the same thing didn't happen here, but I remember that spot vividly. I don't know why they would try that again. But they come back with Escobar still firmly in control. They started breaking out some near falls, and I think that's where the crowd started getting more into it. Ray gave Escobar a really cool-looking head scissors takeover off the top rope, and that sort of bled into Ray's comeback. And they're trading some stuff at the end. Ray got cut off the first time going for the 619, but the second time he connected, he missed a splash the first go-around, but as Escobar tried to stack Ray up for a pinfall, Ray turned that over and then caught Escobar in a crucifix pin, and he scored the upset. Well, I guess you could call it an upset. So Ray retains. Clean win. Escobar obviously sold the frustration afterwards, but no turn. Not that they would have been able to factor in one anyway, because right as Ray and Escobar are going for the handshake, here come the Street Profits, and they lay waste to the babyfaces. And this is actually where the segment got great. Just when you thought they couldn't have made the LWO lackeys look like any bigger fucking tools, this next spot is amazing. First of all, if you do not watch this live, you've got to try to find a clip of it somewhere on YouTube. It is hysterical. Okay, so Lashley comes down and he starts giving his boys a nod of approval. And while Lashley has his back turned toward the ring, here comes one of the Legado lackeys from behind. I think it was Joaquin Wilde. This dude charges full speed down the aisleway toward Lashley. And without missing a beat, Lashley cold cocks this fucking guy right in the head with his elbow. Just kills him with a back fist. Wilde goes down in a heap, laid out like a total Nimrod, totally left for dead. I laughed so hard. And of course, the other Legado goofball guy jumped in the ring and left for dead too. I rewound that spot like 3 times on the DVR. It was glorious. Watching Lashley just Chuck Norris the fuck out of this dweeb. That's got to be the greatest unintentional comedy moment of wrestling this year. He didn't even get a chance. Like full speed. He could not brace for impact. There was no way he could have stopped himself. He ran into a literal brick wall, and it was Lashley's fist. Now again, I'm sort of ambivalent about whatever's going on with the whole Lashley Street Profits story. I mean, I skipped over the Grayson Fodder interview earlier, so obviously they shot something in that segment to tie into this. I just didn't care. This feud doesn't really do a whole lot for me in the way of interest, but who knows? Maybe Escobar will eventually turn and join up with them. And he'll start wearing the suit again like he did when he was in NXT as a villain. Now that would at least be a fresh repackage that's sort of needed. Elsewise, good US title match. Really good in the final few minutes. And all the post-match stuff was sort of blech. I could have taken or leaving that. Left that. Take it or leave it. Taken or left it. However you say it. Doesn't matter. In completely unrelated news, Jade Cargill signed with WWE. That is indeed a thing that happened. Well, we'll see. I mean, if you watch my AEW reviews for the last 2 years, I had my own personal opinions of the way they were featuring Jade Cargill on television. I know Tony Khan thought very highly of her as a talent. Obviously, if WWE signed her, they must see something in her too. Well, I'll say this. She has a lot more options to work with as potential opponents in WWE that are leaps and bounds superior to anybody in that wretched AEW women's division. I don't care what anybody says. At least if they're going to give Jade the rocket ship push in WWE, she at least has some quality main event opponents to work with that'll make her look like a star. My assumption is that, even if she spends a little bit of time in NXT to train and go through the system, I don't see her as somebody they would keep down in NXT for an extended period of time. Like, she's somebody that they'll be looking to feature on the main roster in probably the next year. Mark my words. I still personally never really saw all the hype with Jade Cargill. I do think she's probably a better fit for the WWE machine than she was for AEW. I think with Cody being under the same roof as her again, he might rub off on her in a motivational way. She's in the environment now where professional agents are actually going to sit down and produce her stuff. They'll format everything with her. They'll be able to help her out with things and guide her along the way. She won't be left in the dark. It's going to be a lot different than how it was before when it was all hands on deck in AEW. She was basically left to piss in the wind for 3 years. So I'll stay cautiously optimistic about this whole change of environment. I think if she works hard, sticks the course, listens to what she's told, doesn't get too big for her britches, she might have a bright future ahead of her in WWE. There's a caveat that comes with that, of course. She has to be willing to take criticism and understand that this is a whole different world she's operating under right now. It'll be a learning curve, for sure. And like I said, if she's willing to listen and adapt on the fly, she'll probably be fine. If she comes in with the AEW attitude of, I already got this shit figured out, I'm already a big star, well, then she's pretty much fucked. And I can promise you that. That might fly under the radar with Tony Khan's clown show operation. Not the WWE. They're not going to let her ego get out of control. So, I'm interested. I'm intrigued. Let's see what they do with it. From there, after I skipped over about 7 pre-tapes that were shoehorned in between the ring intros here, we eventually get a Charlotte Flair-Bayley match. 2 of the alleged 4 horsewomen of WWE. 2 of the core building blocks of the whole women's revolution movement. Well, here they are. Just randomly having a match in the middle of SmackDown with no build. Oh, by the way, those pre-tapes I mentioned, one of them was a Pretty Dreadly pre-tape where the blonde teammate learned how to walk again. Because, he was in a wheelchair for, the last 6 weeks? So yeah, magically he's fine now. So I guess that means we'll be seeing the suspect sissies back on our TV monitors in the not-so-distant future. Anyway, here's everything I wrote down about this match. It won't take long. Charlotte does a pre-match promo calling Bayley a stepping stone. Then they have a completely forgettable nothing-happening match that goes about 6 minutes and ends with Charlotte hitting Bayley with a spear for the 3 count. Not a figure 4. Not the flipping DDT move that Charlotte used to use. No, a spear. From out of nowhere. Just like that. One of the alleged top 4 elitists of the women's division in WWE. Beaten in 6 minutes via sloppy spear. Epic. Just more of the same old shit, I guess. Pounding Charlotte down everybody's throat like she's God's gift to the world. You've been riding that gravy train for what? 12 years? Ain't nothing going to change there. And then there was some post-match stuff with Asuka running in to save Charlotte from a beatdown. She ranted in Japanese. I have no idea what she said. Nor do I care. And with that, we had our final segment. 1 week after John Cena was laid out and left for dead in the middle of the ring, much like his now former tag partner AJ Styles was left for dead. Well, of course, AJ is still out selling the injury. Not Super Cena. Nope. He's back 1 week later, perfectly fine. Totally no selling the effects. Storming down the rampway like he's fresh out of the fucking oven. Like nothing ever happened. Just like the good old days. Now you can imagine watching that on a full-time basis for the better part of a decade plus. You can see why that shit got old real fucking fast. So yeah. Cena's out there doing the whole droning monologue. I don't have a partner at the moment, yada yada. And of course, his solution is quite simple. He's not going to give up. Because, well, that's just not something John Cena does. It's not written into his DNA. He did, however, tease that he would be willing to fight the Bloodline by himself in a handicap match, which I totally would not have put past WWE to book. They'd have Cena smash over them and win in like 5 minutes, and I totally wouldn't bat an eyelash. The quintessential definition of lol Cena wins. They should have done that. Now, as it turns out, they had other plans. Here comes the Bloodline to bring the fight to Cena once again. And they start ganging up on him in the corner. Solo gives him like 3 running hip attacks into the turnbuckle. And, well, they're about to put Cena through the announce table on the floor, when who should come out to make the save but L.A. Knight? Yeah. An electric pop, by the way. God, when that music hit, that roof blew off the fucking building in Sacramento. I mean, it's like, it was almost up there with the Rock reaction, if you really think about it. And here comes Knight, barreling down the aisleway. He slides in, starts throwing fisticuffs with the heels. Everybody's chanting, yeah, yeah. Like every punch and strike. It's kind of amazing to think about for a minute. When you take into account just how massively over this guy is right now. And the sad thing is, you know they're going to fuck it up. But eventually, he and Cena dispose of the heels. LA Knight picks up the contract. He signs on the dotted line. And he hands the paperwork to Cena, stating that he is officially in for Fastlane. And the match will now be LA Knight and John Cena versus Solo and Jimmy Uso, which is sort of a roundabout way to get to where they were after the last WWE Live event, where Cena guest refereed the match with Knight and The Miz. They were briefly teasing that tag team, and then they kind of drifted away from it when they threw AJ into the mix temporarily. But now it seems they're back on the LA Knight bandwagon here, and that's all well and good. It was a hot finish of the show. The people love LA Knight. Can't stress that enough. I mean, it's not a news banner bulletin at this point. Everybody knows it. Of course, with me thinking long term, what do they do after Fastlane? I really don't know what the game plan is right now. I mean, I have to presume Cena and Knight go over in that match. Does that factor them into something at Survivor Series with the Bloodline? And if so, how do you deviate from that pathway to start focusing on the build to Rock and Roman for Mania? And I have to imagine they got something in store for LA Knight and John Cena afterwards. Is it a feud? Is it doing more tag work together? It's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to be difficult to try to convince the fans to boo LA Knight right now anytime in the next 7 years. Not with how over that guy is right now. We'll see. I mean, it's a fine main event attraction match for a filler pay-per-view. It'll get over in the building because it's given LA Knight a featured spot on the card. It was very weird how they got back to this point, though. Circling back to LA Knight and getting him involved in the equation again. Like, he just kind of fell off the map in the last couple weeks. But I'm fine with the call. You know, they only got another week to hard sell the match for pay-per-view, but yeah, maybe we'll get LA Knight doing some promo work, and that'll be enough to save it. But again, going back to what I talked about at the beginning of the show, it's kind of a talking point I reiterate constantly on these SmackDown reports. It's all about the Bloodline. The only material that's really worth giving a damn about. You know, the Rey Escobar title match was good this week, but again, I'm not really sold on the stuff with them, Street Profits and Lashley. It's one of those mid-card programs that's just kind of meh to me. I mean, I'm not against them turning Escobar heel down the road. And if that ends up being the deciding factor on flipping him and eventually having him join Lashley's crew, okay. It's something. I mean, I prefer that over the white meat babyface gimmick they got going with him now. Because that stuff is just turned the channel heat bad. The rest of the show is just kind of the usual. A bunch of lesser material that rounds out the show, but doesn't really move the needle one way or the other. And they got another week to throw together a halfway decent card for that Fastlane special. I haven't been taking note of what's been happening on Raw, but on the SmackDown end of things, they don't got a lot going on. It's Cena in the Bloodline. They're carrying the show. And then whatever they're booking on Raw right now to fill out the other half of the card. But we'll see. We'll see. And with that, that'll bring us to NXT. It's funny, I actually watched this show and the Retro Raw show back-to-back on Friday night. Boy, what a stark contrast 20 years makes. Especially when you see it through the lens of the same company. 1994 WWF versus 2013 WWF. Quite different entities. Well, it's not entirely true. There are definitely some similarities. Especially when your opening match is a cartoon mixed tag match with two ballroom dancers, a quirky girl with a goofy dance routine, and Santino Marella. I don't think I need to say any more when it comes to Santino. He was a gimmick in and of himself. No strings attached. Would have fit right in with Retro Raw circa 94 with all the other wacky cartoon personalities. Which I guess is the perfect segue into the opener, since we're on the subject. And they basically just leapt right into the shitstorm. Boy, there's a lot to unpack here with this mixed tag. And not a lot of it is good. Spoiler. Well, I guess we should start here. The match is Fandango and Summer Rae versus Emma and Santino Marella. The bane of most hardcore fans' existence. Yeah, I totally forgot Santino was still around at this point. I thought they had long since given up on that experiment. I mean, that shit got old back in the mid-2000s when they were rocket ship pushing this fucking goofball all over Raw. No, they were still milking that dry pussy for all it was worth in 2013. I don't know why. I mean, I know Santino is a polarizing gimmick for a lot of people out there. I always kind of thought he was over the top and obnoxious, but that just might be the difference between me and most casual fans. Because I'll tell you what, regardless of what I thought of the guy, regardless of whether or not I ever liked him, I cannot deny this dude was mega over with the core WWE audience. For whatever reason, these people love this rotten gimmick. I mean, the guy was a one-trick pony. He had one shtick, the knockoff Mr. Socko thing. Elsewise, he had nothing going for him but a bunch of comedy spots. Couldn't wrestle worth a shit. Had terrible basics. Horrible body. Which thankfully they covered up with a singlet. The outlaw-looking tattoos. Definitely not my flavor. And meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, you got this newly fresh Fandango character showing up earlier in the year, beating the likes of Chris Jericho at WrestleMania in his debut match. Now, several months later, he is doing jobs on NXT to the WWE's version of Orange Cassidy. And I know that might trigger some people out there, but let's call it like it is. That is essentially what Santino Marella was. He was the company mascot for WWE from like 2005 till whenever they finally featured Endeavored as no talent ass. And these four basically went out there and did a WWE comedy match. The crowd enjoyed it because they always like Santino's shtick. And they did a bunch of wacky spots, like Santino going to high-five Emma at one point, but the referee called it as a legal tag. And like, okay, cute idea, funny at first. But of course, they had to run the joke into the ground by doing it for 5 fucking minutes. So that was annoying. They also did the thing where Santino would keep trying to do the nip-up spot, but then he would keep losing his balance and then falling on the back of his neck. Because, neck injuries are hilarious. Concussions, yeah, that's a laughing matter. And finally, they built to the spot where Fandango keeps trying to get up and hit Santino with a diving elbow, but Santino would do the shake, rattle, and roll back and forth to avoid him. It's all obviously phony and contrived. By the way, I should add, all of the comedy spots with the guys was collectively better than anything the girls tried to do. Because then they tried to go in there and wrestle for real. And this is where I simply wrote down in my notes, utter shit. They did a bunch of horrible looking catfight spots. Summer Rae, God bless her. I'm sure she was a nice gal. Definitely was not bred for the sport of pro wrestling. My, was she the fucking shits. Hot. Good body. Very flexible. She could do a split. Terrible professional wrestler. Emma wasn't too much better herself, but she could at least do a few basics. And they finally do the spot at the end where Emma goes to put the Cobra sock on. Actually, that's what led to the horrible catfight sequence where Summer Rae was giving Emma the Survivor Jenna slaps. Actually, now that I reflect back, I think Jenna's slaps were more convincing. And then finally Santino put on the sock and pinned Fandango. Again, I reiterate what I said earlier. The same Fandango that beat Chris fucking Jericho at WrestleMania in his debut match. That same guy, he is now losing opening matches on TV to Santino Marella in a comedy match on the developmental show. So yeah, that about sucked the dick. 20 minutes. Did I mention that? Counting the break spots. 16, I guess, if you want to remove the break spots. Still, about 15 minutes longer than it needed to be. And here's the frustrating part. They go from that utter abomination, and then they immediately try to get serious with Cassius Ohno versus Luke Harper in a mean guy grudge match. It did not sit well with me. All sincerity, though, beyond the fact that I always hated the name Cassius Ohno, what a talent. It sucks that they broke him up with Claudio when they signed both of them to WWE. That was a stupid fucking decision on their part. They could have made so much money off those two as a top tag team in WWE. All that money wasted. Thrown down the drain. All because they decided it would be a better idea to break them up and have Chris Hero spend his entire WWE run in developmental. Now, some of it may be being his fault for not taking better care of his body, but still, I never got over that. They signed the Kings of Wrestling, a former top tag team in Ring of Honor, fresh off the indie circuit, when they were white hot. They brought both of them to the WWE, and their first inclination was, let's split them up. Let's push them as singles guys. Yeah. They thought that would be a good idea. It was not. Now, obviously, this match was something they set up last week when Cassius said he wanted to fight a member of the Wyatt family. Actually, I think his direct quote was, "I'm sick of management fucking around with me, so you better book me in a match, else I'm going to start doing run-ins with every single match on the television show." And then Brad Maddox booked him against Harper this week. Did not require a lot of forethought. And I've done the Wyatt family breakdown on the channel before. I'm not going to go too into depth about that again. The Bray Wyatt passing is still a relatively timely event, so this was going to be hard to cover anyway. It's easy enough for me to sit here and say that my favorite run for Bray in the WWE was the initial run with Harper and Rowan, that original three-piece group when they first brought them all in. But, now that I've had the chance to reflect back on Bray's career, that probably was some of the best work he ever did. And it was certainly my favorite. From about this point until they jobbed him out to Cena at WrestleMania, Bray Wyatt, he was a white-hot gimmick. More so than just about anybody on the roster at the time, not named Bryan Danielson, I guess. And even with Luke Harper, a.k.a. Brody Lee, him being a centerpiece of that group too. Again, his abrupt death in 2020 was something that hit people really hard. Almost the same way the Bray death did. And I was never a fan of Brody Lee's run in AEW. The whole Dark Order shit. That stuff was just awful. And I don't think they ever really capitalized fully on what Brody could bring to the table as a big guy with some size and athletic ability. The stuff he did in WWE was really good. Yeah, he was mostly in a tag team with Rowan for his entire run. But, he branched out and did some singles work at various points. I don't think he was ever going to be a main eventer in WWE. I don't think they ever saw him as a main shelf top guy, like world champion material. But as a upper mid-card level heel, Brody Lee, Luke Harper, they could have gotten more mileage out of him. They could have made him their modern-day Bruiser Brody if they really wanted to. But, just like a lot of things in WWE, they start something with a guy, they lose focus, or should I say Vince loses focus, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't pan out. Now, this was mostly a showcase squash for Harper, and it's fine. He was doing a lot of LA Knight impersonations early on by shouting, "Yeah!" That went on for almost the entire match. The people caught on to it, too. There were some fans that were going along with it. But again, he was a big dude. He could move. He had a sick-looking Larry finish. I love the whole dirty wife beater t-shirt with the sweat stains, the cut-up ripped jeans, the straggly hair. I mean, they nailed the look for this gimmick. Again, never liked the Brody run in AEW, was not a fan. But Luke Harper in WWE, especially with how they brought him in and put him in that initial group with Bray Wyatt, it was the perfect fit. Now, by this point, and I think they were talking about this some on commentary, the Wyatts had already debuted on the main roster and were making headway. So you kind of had to put Harper over here to continue that momentum. Cassius Ohno doing a job wasn't going to hurt anybody. It was fine. I just wish it didn't follow that garbage opener with all the comedy posse. I mean, at least if you're going to do comedy, do it right. Kind of like with what they did with Big Cass and Enzo Amore here. The gimmick is simple. Enzo's an annoying loudmouth with no filter. So they embrace it. Cass is trying to do his promo, but Enzo keeps interjecting. Cass eventually gets fed up with him and tells him to put a sock in it. And the punchline at the very end is Enzo figuring out Cass's joke about Scott Dawson and Rusev not being able to handle hard tacos at Taco Bell. Because, they're soft. SAWFT. I mean, it's stupid, but it was at least humorous. I thought it was. I also really don't know what to make of Big Cass saying that Dax Harwood looks like a car mechanic with the gear he comes out to the ring with. When I look back, though, he was entirely off base. I just don't like hearing Dax being referred to as a car mechanic. That's a joke better say for Jon Moxley and his rotten look. So, well, from there, staying on the subject of the current tag division, we go back to the ring for the tag title match, the Ascension versus Corey Graves and Adrian Neville. Oh yeah, and Mojo Rawley is coming. Speaking of insufferable gimmicks, he is here to let us know that he does not get hyped. He stays hyped. Yeah, get ready to hear that phrase beaten over your head. You will be hearing plenty more of it for the next 8 years. Back to the title match, though. Among many things I will never understand about classic NXT, by far the most baffling to me, the fan reception for Corey Graves. I don't get it. I never got it. For the little time I ever saw Corey Graves as an active wrestler, it never clicked with me. I never got the appeal. I never got the gimmick. I always liked Pac. Neville, whatever you want to call him. And obviously, as we'd find out in the coming months, they were grooming him for a big singles push. Corey, not so much. Generally, I would say the title match here was good. Very basic, simple stuff from both parties. The Ascension spent a lot of the match working over Graves for the heat. They picked a very odd time to cut to their break spot, though. It was like right smack dab in the middle of the heels beating on Corey. There was no big move. There was no big spot that led up to it. It was just one moment Connor's in there beating down Graves, and then bam, immediate cut to break. And they come back with the heels working over Corey some more. I did want to point out, I think it was Connor that did this move. I always forget, was he the bigger guy with the short haircut, or was that Victor? Probably should know that. For whatever reason, it's escaping me, though. It's like that other tag team that comes in eventually. Buddy and the other guy. What was his name? Was it Murphy? Buddy and Murphy? Remember the NXT fans would always chant, "Which one's Buddy? Which one's Murphy?" Just a total outright burial. It was kind of the same deal here with Connor and Victor. I think I just collectively called them the Ascension. Partially because Connor and Victor were such stupid names. Connor Victor. Like they were fucking middle school playmates. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, the spot, yeah. So one of the heels has Corey in a leg scissors, and because the bigger guy had some muscle mass on him, he was actually able to manipulate Corey a little bit on the mat. So he basically hoisted Corey up into the air, almost in like a modified surfboard position, and then he dropped Corey right back on his ass. Looked really cool. A lot of leg strength to do a move like that, but it also probably did a number on Corey's tailbone. But visually, it looked awesome. And eventually, Victor Connor posts himself in the other corner so Neville can get the hot tag. And he's a house of fire for a little bit. All his shit looked great. He's never out of place for anything. He's hitting all his big babyface moves, big dive out to the floor, which I was fine with because it was one dive in the whole match. It wasn't a dive that happened 17 seconds after the opening bell when the guy already did 30 other previous dives. And finally we get the finish. Neville sets up one of the heels for his red arrow, but as he's coming down, the other heel pulls him out of the way. So Neville crashes and burns. It was a really scary landing too, because Neville almost didn't clear one of the Ascension guys and came precariously close to landing right on his ankle. But Corey tried to be the ultimate savior at the end by tagging himself in. And, of course, that backfired. He immediately got cut off with a thrust kick and then pinned with the fall of man. So my instincts were correct. They did, in fact, put the belts on the Ascension 1 week after they won the Gauntlet Challenge and barreled over 3 other teams. And the next week, they just come right out and steamroll over the current babyface champions in like 12 minutes. That, I believe, is what you would call in wrestling a smash over. It was good for what it was. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think this leads to a Corey Graves heel turn not too far from now. Because again, I know they're going to be prepping Neville for a big singles push in the lead up to 2014. So they've got to be doing that split eventually. And that's fine. They had their run with the belts. They dropped them. Now you can split them off and send one guy toward the title picture. And, well, the other guy, you can just kind of let him flounder for a while until he has to retire due to concussion problems. Then ultimately becomes the worst WWE color commentator in the modern era. And meanwhile, the Ascension, well, they definitely lived up to their moniker of the Ascension. They ascended right into the title hunt and immediately won the belts. Now, eventually they would get called up to the main roster and ruined. So, I don't know what you would call them at that point. The Descension. But that's a story for a different day. But that led into our final segment on the program. The Bo Dallas Invitational. And let me just say this from the onset, so we can establish it early on. This was the perfect pro wrestling segment from start to finish. There was not one single thing in this 8 minutes of television time that I could find issue with. It was brilliantly put together. Maybe if I wanted to nitpick something, I could say, well, they wasted Claudio Castagnoli in a total throwaway angle. At the time, that would have pissed me off. But AEW's been doing the same thing for the last year with him, so it really didn't register as much. But again, this was set up the previous week. Bo Dallas is issuing an open invitational to anybody that wants a title shot. Or I should say, wants a shot at him. And if they can knock him off and score a pin, then they would receive a title shot in 2 weeks. So we naturally begin the gauntlet with them sending out some ham and egger. I don't even think it was a recognizable indie guy because, I couldn't pick him out. Probably just some local guy from Tampa they brought in. And of course, it is made 10 times better by the fans chanting, and I quote, "Let's go this guy." Just totally burying him before the bell even rang. And it goes pretty much as you would expect. Bo beats him in like 30 seconds with a running shoulder tackle. And because he's a heel, and he's full of himself, he feels confident enough to let the gauntlet continue. At which point, out comes Leo Kruger. And now things are a bit more serious because it's somebody legit that they have been pushing on the roster. And, well, right before they're about to ring the bell, who should come out, as I noted, but Claudio, who at this point was going by Cesaro. And now he wants a piece of Bo, which, as you would expect, did not sit well with Kruger. So those guys evidently get into a brawl, and the NXT fans are chanting, "Triple threat." They all had immediate go-away heat with me. Good Lord. Yeah, the multi-man era of modern wrestling is soon upon us. Where 3 ways and 4 ways and 5 ways and 8 ways became a regular recurring thing. Not looking forward to that. Thankfully, it was not a triple threat. Instead, Bo dispatches of both of them in very quick succession. And by that, I mean he just dumps them out to the floor, which was kind of sad, if you think about it from Claudio's vantage point. Yet another example of wasted potential in WWE for years and years. And I'd love to say AEW got it right, but they're doing more of a disservice by shoehorning him into a faction with a bunch of bodies. At least in WWE, Claudio got to shine on his own. What is he in AEW? A fucking third wheel in a faction full of losers? So yeah, Claudio and Kruger just sort of vanish. I have no idea where they went. And that left just enough time for El Local to make a special cameo, as he is now entering the Bo Dallas Invitational. Of course, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where this was going. You could tell it was Sammy as soon as he came out from behind the curtain. The beard was a dead giveaway. Then, of course, he gets in there and pretty much wipes out Bo with the Haluva kick in about 15 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And eventually they do the slow, dramatic build to the removal of the mask. And to the shock of nobody, It is Sami Zayn under the hood. And of course, Bo sells it with complete bewilderment. How? How could such a thing occur? I never saw this coming. But again, if you think back to last week, it makes sense because Bo laid the groundwork in that promo that anybody could participate in the Bo Invitational except for Sami Zayn. Because, well, he's an asshole, I guess. So with Sami being a smart man, he decided to pull a fast one on Bo and sneak his way into the Invitational under a different gimmick. So I guess technically it counts. Granted, he probably would have been better off not revealing himself as to keep the illusion going. You know, that way Bo didn't have an actual case when he evidently tries to argue the decision should be overturned. Which, JBL is the alleged heel GM of NXT, so I have to assume he'll find a way to fuck Sami over. Whether it's right or not. But it was well done. The perfect segment to put the heel in his place, to make a mockery of the whole open challenge deal. Again, everybody saw through the charade, but it made sense. Everybody sold it perfectly, and it leaves everything up in the air for 2 weeks out. Will that decision stand? Or will Bo try to argue the call to get it overturned? It's a good question. Guess we'll wait and see how the boss responds. No, that's not Sasha Banks for the record. I'm talking about the actual Commander-in-Chief, JBL, who, by the way, was not on the show, even though they did that whole pomp and circumstance the week before, introducing him as the new general manager of NXT, the interim GM. But yeah, he was not on the show at all this week. Overall, though, when I look back at everything on the card, again, remove that dorky comedy match that took up the first 15 minutes. It was a fun show. Good squash to keep the Wyatt family momentum going. That was a big fun guy match, even though it was short. The tag title match was decent. The title switch at the end, they sold it as a major upset. But again, they're giving the monster push to the Ascension at this point, so, you had to smash them over if you're going to give them that Road Warrior-esque push. And it worked. It left some holes in the tag team situation with Neville and Graves. You know what's going to happen there. My guess is they'll probably get a title rematch at some point, and then that's when they'll do the breakup. But they're leaving that open-ended, and I like that. And I like the main event gauntlet stuff at the end. That was fantastic. It moved the story along with Sami Zayn and Bo Dallas. The people liked it. Got over in the building. Again, Sami is red hot during this period. And like I talk about, it's one of those things. These shows are never going to be perfect. And there's always going to be those small presentation things that bother me with the way WWE goes about producing segments. But booking-wise, formatting-wise, structure-wise, everything makes sense. Not everything is going to resonate with me, but I'm not sitting here wondering what the fuck's going on from week to week. I'm not being left in the dark constantly about who's babyface and who's heel, why people are mad at each other, why I should care. It's a very easy 60-minute show to watch. And that's why it works. Nothing is overly convoluted. It's just, the more I watch of modern wrestling, the more I realize, why can't things just be simple? Why does everything have to be so goddamn convoluted? To drag stories out for 6 to 12 months and throw all these curveballs in the way to keep people guessing. It's just, you ever hear of KISS? Keep it stupid simple. Why don't we revert back to that formula of booking? Doesn't mean you have to insult people's intelligence. predictability is not always a bad thing. Even if people see it coming, if it's a proper payoff, if it's a fitting conclusion to a story, people will be fine with it. I mean, again, I called that whole gauntlet finish the week beforehand. When Bo told Sammy that he's not allowed to participate in it, I said, well, clearly he's going to come out under some mask. I joked that they should use the El Generico gimmick to get it over, but the El Local thing, I mean, it was a holdover from the match Sammy had the previous week, so it made sense. And again, predictable, but I was fine with it because it was logical and I could follow it. It's why it works. It's like all the other content we review on this channel. Easy, simple, logical. The way pro wrestling used to be before it got all fucked up by the marks overtaking the industry. And we decided to let the inmates run the asylum. Look where that's gotten us in 2023. It's gotten us less people buying and watching the product than at any other point in recorded history. But again, conversations for a different day. Alrighty. So thanks all for tuning in to check out this Monday edition of the FSWR channel. Again, you can find us on Rumble and YouTube every Monday and Friday for new content, new videos. This coming Friday, we'll be doing the regular normal Friday podcast. Classic reviews, nothing out of the ordinary there. The following Monday is where things are going to get interesting because WWE has that Fastlane special coming up. And got to figure out how I want to try to factor that into the show. It'll probably mean us omitting the SmackDown review next weekend, which is kind of a recurring thing. I've done that before. So if that's the case, then that'll leave us with Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and then we'll do that WWE Fastlane special recap. So time length-wise, it should be the regular formatting of how we do the Monday show. We'll just leave out one of the SmackDown reviews, which is no problem. No skin off my back. If I did have to leave out something next weekend, well, SmackDown would probably be the first to go. Anyway, appreciate y'all taking the time to watch the show and always come back for more torture. I appreciate the support where I can get it. Take care and peace out.